Well, good evening. My name is Les Smith. I'm with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's conversation. We're providing an update for the Oscoda area and former Wurtsmith Air Force Base PFAS update meeting. Before we begin this evening's webinar, I would like to welcome to our virtual podium Sue Manente from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Hello, everyone. We are back for another Skoda area and former Wurtsmith PFAS update meeting. It's our first meeting of 2021, and I hope this meeting finds you all well, staying healthy and staying warm. So tonight we're going to be hearing from the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. They'll be providing an update to us on the Wurtsmith and Oscoda area investigations. We'll also hear about the foam study. The Michigan Department of Health and Human Services will be providing an update. And then we have a good amount of time for a question and answer session. And we'll conclude the meeting around 8 o'clock. Before we get started, Les is going to give us some information on using Zoom. So Les, if you would, please.
Thanks, Sue. This is going to be probably new, just probably to a few people, but it's customary for us to go through housekeeping. Just a reminder to all in attendance that our lines are muted and that we are recording the webinar, which will be shared on 2 locations. Will be shared on EGLE's YouTube channel, and it will be shared on the Oscoda webpage, MPART webpage. Also, I'd like you to know, if you have questions for our panelists this evening, you can always type a question at any time in the Q&A box located in the bottom of your Zoom control panel screen. If you have a question during the Q&A portion of the meeting, you can always raise your hand electronically. I will see you and we will call on you and get your question answered. And for those of you that are on the phone, and we have one caller on the phone. So panelists, just be aware that we do have one. So we want to make sure that our listeners that are on phone only are able to picture in their mind some of the areas we're talking about this evening when we're being descriptive with our presentation. So again, Q&A box for questions, raise your hand using the hand icon at the bottom of your screen, and *9 if you are on the phone. And with that, Sue, that's it for the housekeeping.
Thanks, Les. And before we get started with the presentations, I would like to ask if we have any legislative members or representatives joining us this evening. And if you are, you can raise your virtual hand and Les will unmute you so you can make that introduction. Do we have any legislative representation with us tonight?
This is Jake Bennett from Congressman Dan Kildee's office.
Hi, Jake. Thanks for joining us. Any other legislative representation? All right. Do we have any local officials with us tonight? And if you are, feel free to raise your hand and Les will unmute you. I see we have Ann with us. Les, can you unmute Ann?
I will unmute Ann. I was trying to unmute William, but let's see, we'll get Ann here.
I just unmuted. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, it's Ann Richards, Oscoda Township Supervisor.
Great to have you with us, Ann.
Thanks, Sue.
And Bill?
Yeah, hi, this is Bill Palmer, Skoda Township Trustee.
Hi, Bill.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Any other local officials with us? All right, well, let's get started here. Our first presentation is from Beth Place, who is with EGLE. And Beth, please go ahead.
Sure. Hi, my name is Beth Place, and I'm the EGLE Remediation and Redevelopment Project Manager for the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base. EGLE became aware of PFAS concentrations in groundwater in 2010 while conducting sampling at a former fire training area. Since then, both EGLE and Air Force have performed investigations in the area. However, Air Force is the agency responsible for investigation and, if necessary, addressing contamination caused while operating the base. Tomorrow, Air Force will hold a Restoration Advisory Board meeting that the public is invited to attend. Next slide. Okay. Air Force is currently planning 2 interim remedies to address PFAS at Wurtsmith. One remedy has been proposed to capture PFAS in groundwater near Air Force Beach along Van Etten Lake and treat groundwater at the existing central treatment system. Design refinement is ongoing, and Air Force plans to capture the highest concentrations and continue to meet Part 31 substantive requirements in effluent of the system. Based on the tentative schedule, Air Force plans to provide EGLE access to review the draft interim proposed plan in late January of 2021. After agency comment and resolution, Air Force will provide a 30-day public comment period for the interim proposed plan. Air Force will also prepare an interim record of decision and remedial action work plan that includes the design. Air Force had the goal to design to finalize the IRA designs in late spring, and in late June, Air Force plans to begin installation of this interim remedy. I just want folks to note that these slides are from October, and so design refinements may have occurred along the way. Next slide, please, Sue. The second interim remedy, Air Force plans to reduce concentrations of contaminants entering Clark's Marsh through expanding the capture at FTO2 groundwater treatment system. This will include expanding the infiltration gallery and updating the GAC treatment facility. This figure is from Aerostar's October 2020 presentation to EGLE, and again, the designs may have been refined. Air Force here also plans to capture the highest concentrations and continue to meet Part 31 substantive requirements in effluent. Based on the tentative schedule, EGLE provided comments to the draft interim proposed plan in early January 2021. And then after agency comment resolution, Air Force will provide a 30-day public comment period for this interim proposed plan. Air Force also plans to prepare an interim record of decision and interim remedial action work plan that includes the design. Air Force plans to install the design or begin installation in July of 2021. Next slide, please, Sue. This is just an outline of the CERCLA process. And right now you can see kind of highlighted in this mustard yellow color is the remedial investigation. Air Force has already completed the preliminary assessment and site inspection phases. And now they're currently planning the remedial investigation to address PFAS at Wurtsmith. Okay. This will get us towards this is the process to get towards the final remedy. Next slide, please, Sue. Air Force and EGLE have been working together on the remedial investigation while Air Force is the lead agency. And we will have an additional scoping meeting in January to further discuss the designing the plan for collecting data to support the goals of the remedial investigation. As part of the remedial investigation process, Air Force plans to conduct a human health and ecological risk assessment. This will be provided in a separate work plan. Air Force plans to have the final work plan together in late spring 2021 and begin to conduct field work in late spring 2021. I'd like to introduce Amanda Armbruster, who is the project manager for the Oscoda area PFAS sites. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. like Beth said, my name's Amanda Armbruster. I'm a project manager and geologist for EGLE's Remediation Redevelopment Division, and I work out of the Bay City District Office, and I'm going to give a short update on the Oscoda area PFAS sites. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this slide shows the locations of the Oscoda area PFAS sites that have been identified by EGLE. The sites include Loud Drive, Colbath Road, River Road, Oscoda area, schools area, the McDonald Country Store, Oscoda Township Dump, and Osable Township Smith Street area. The green lines that are depicted on the figure show the general outline of each investigation area. Many of these locations were contaminated as a result of former fires that were fought with PFAS containing firefighting foam. EGLE has been sampling the groundwater from monitoring wells installed throughout the Oscoda community on a quarterly basis for the past year to evaluate these sites. The data for this investigation work is available on the MPART website. And I believe at the end of this presentation, there'll be some links, including a link to that MPART page where you can seek out the Oscoda area sites and read about them. And that information on the MPART page is typically updated on a monthly basis. EGLE and DHHS have also completed extensive private drinking water well sampling of many homes throughout the Oscoda community. DHHS, their drinking water sampling initiative was done. There was quite a few wells that I believe they'll be speaking about that were sampled in 2020. They plan to do some additional sampling in 2021 of drinking water wells. And there are future plans to expand the municipal water service to the Oscoda area locations that don't currently have city water service and where PFAS has been found in private drinking water wells. In the meantime, affected homeowners with private wells can obtain free filters from the local health department. And moving forward, EGLE does plan to continue quarterly groundwater sampling for the next year. This data will be used to help determine whether contaminant concentrations remain steady or whether they're increasing and require additional attention or investigation. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this slide shows the locations of all of the monitoring wells that were installed by EGLE over the past few years. Most of these wells were installed between 2017 and 2019. There were approximately 50 to 60 EGLE monitoring wells, and we use about 20 to 30 of these locations to do our quarterly sampling. Sue, I'm going to have you go ahead and point out the location of RIMW 26. Right there. I'm having her point that out because this is a location where we have a new area of concern. I'll go ahead and advance to the next slide. This is a blow up of the area surrounding monitoring well, EGLE's monitoring well, MW26. This well is located outside the boundaries of the other Oscoda area sites that were shown previously. You can see the image on the right. There's a small red dot. That's the actual location of this well. It's near the intersection of Mill Street and Sunset Road. And the reason why we're concerned with this location is because some of you may know that in August of this year, EGLE's drinking water cleanup criteria for PFOA and PFOS changed from a total PFOA/PFOS value of 70 parts per trillion to individual criteria of 8 parts per trillion for PFOA and 16 parts per trillion for PFOS. MW26 was sampled in October of this year, which was after the criteria changed. And we received results for that sampling event in November, compared them to the new criteria, and the PFOA concentration in MW6 was 11 parts per trillion, which is above our new drinking water criteria. We'd previously thought that this area had municipal water service. There is municipal lines along Sunset Road, Mill Street, and River Road in this area. But when we looked a little bit more closely, we determined that private wells were likely present in a residential neighborhood in the assumed down gradient flow direction of this area. So we canvassed the area and identified 14 properties where we thought drinking water wells were being used. We sent them, the owners of these properties, letters in December requesting permission to conduct free PFAS sampling of their wells. And so far, 8 property owners have responded to that request, and EGLE's consultant, which is AECOM, is in the process of contacting the homeowners and plans to set up sampling for next week. The source of the PFAS in this contamination in this area is currently unknown, but we are evaluating potential upgrading sources. Some of the surrounding property use includes residential properties. There are some warehouse type buildings. There's a garbage transfer station, an ambulance garage, a cemetery, and then to the southwest, there are some industrial and manufacturing businesses. So there'll be more to come with this particular location. And I'll be happy to answer any questions later on in the presentation. But right now, our next presenter is Barry Harding with AECOM.
Hi, all. I'm glad to be here. Like much of the population, I'm working from my confines in my bedroom here. This study, I want to preface a few things. My background, I've got an interdisciplinary background as a biologist and a geologist. I'm a senior scientist, technical leader with AECOM. Back in, around 2019, Michigan's Pfas Action Response Team, MPART, and folks from EGLE approached AECOM about a few different scientific studies. And these studies were geared toward better understanding the fate, migration, and behavior of PFAS compounds in general. So one of the goals here related to PFAS surface water foams was really to dissect and better understand where these foams come from, what's the behavior, how are they transported. I'll talk, this is technical in nature, I'll talk in lay terms, then afterwards when there's questions, if folks want to dial into some more specifics, we can talk tech or we can just talk about common science related to these. Sue, next slide, please. So generally surface water foams, there's a distinction. These foams are different than aqueous film forming foams or AFFF. These aren't firefighting foams. These are a naturally occurring media that we not only see in Michigan, we see in other states. There are studies in Minnesota. There's been studies in Sydney, Australia. So there's studies that are done globally. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'm showing, there's a picture here, and I wanted to really expound upon the global aspects. So this is a picture in the Bay of Bengal in Chennai, India, and it's a little bit disconcerting to see these kids playing in this foam. Now, these foams occur, just last week, I saw some pictures of foams that occurred along the Australian Tasman sea coast. These foams can be both of a synthetic origin due to chemicals in water, but they can also be natural. And it's akin to, I use the analogy, if you make a lemon meringue pie and you're whipping up egg whites, right, to make a meringue, right? That protein in the egg whites whips up and you create a foam. Well, the naturally occurring proteins and other substances in water can create these foams. It's a widespread phenomenon. Compositionally, these foams, there's a gaseous component, and that's not only air, but it's gases associated with what we call biogenic gases, like CO2, methane, other trace gases. But also, if you're along the beach and you do see these foams, if you look, there might be little particulates, mineral, little humic substances, things like little branches, twigs. So not only do you have this physical component of the foams, you also have this microbiological, there's a biological aspect. And then as I move forward, I'll talk about how we dissected the composition of these foams as part of the study. Next slide, please. So I'm showing a picture here. Many folks are familiar with the foam that periodically accumulates on the shore of Van Etten Lake. This is along the beach. One of the things that we wanted to understand is what is an effective and reproducible way to collect samples. So that was part of the actual field aspects of how do we get this foam? How do we analyze it? How do we do it in a reproducible manner to evaluate, are the data good? That's one of our goals. Then the other thing is we wanted to tweak those procedures, not only for doing it in a practical, commonsensical way, but also to reduce costs to do this type of work. The amount of money that is spent in evaluating these chemicals is very astronomical. So the other facet to this is we want to evaluate the behavior of the PFAS, not only in the foams, but down in the surface water. And then as part of that is we work on what we call a conceptual site model. And the site models allow us to create a reasonable understanding of how a certain media develops, in this case, the foams. Next slide, please. So regarding the approach and design, we picked, this was a statewide study. It does include lakes, Lake Van Etten and also Cedar Lake. It also includes inland lake, Lake Marguerite up near Grayling, but it also focused on various tributaries in Michigan, including the Rogue, Huron, and Thornapple rivers. And of course, the Rogue River in Rockford, there's a spillway there, there's a dam with a lot of turbulence below dams. So there's usually at that location, there's always foam there on any given day. The study looked at both surface water and the foam, right, co-located to compare the concentrations of PFAS in both media. The other thing that was different than any previous studies was we expanded, not using just the 28 compound list. There's various lists, there's a 24 list, 28 list. In this case, we actually expanded to do the 41 list that includes some additional PFAS chemicals, that things like different precursor compounds and some other chemicals not widely analyzed. The other facet was when we looked at these foams, we wanted to be pure scientists and look at, you have a chemical makeup, but you also have a biological makeup. And the reason we looked at the biology is we were interested to see if these foams could have originated from other natural sources, biological sources. And then, so we got in and we analyzed for bacteria and fungi, and I'll talk a little bit about those procedures. So there's a geographic map that shows this nice spread of data, these different locations. In subsequent work, we're evaluating now, we're going to expand and get into some other inland waters to collect more data. Next slide, please. So looking at the sampling approach, we worked up a sort of an assembly line technique. And what it entails is we're using a pole skimmer. And this would be an extension pole that has a net. And in this case, we used clean cheesecloth, right? And we evaluate that, make sure none of these sampling equipment have PFAS in them, because PFAS can be derived from other synthetic materials. So we're using this dipper net where we can safely, from the shore or river bank, we can actually extend out and grab these samples. Once we collect this foam sample, we transfer to polyethylene zip style Ziploc bags, 1 gallon capacity bags. And what we find out here is generally it equates to a gallon of foam gives us about a shot glass of liquid, or roughly 20 milliliters. That's about a shot glass full of liquid to analyze, right? And so that's not much water that you get from all this foam sampling. that central image that I'm showing here, that yellow device with a screen, that's a data logger, and that allows us to precisely locate. It's sort of like it's a surveying piece of equipment that allows us to precisely locate in the field where we sample things. Excuse me. Once the samples are transferred to the sample vessels, we can send the actual liquid off that's decanted off the foam. We can send those off for various analyses for the 41 PFAS. And then also we're looking at the actual genetic composition of what organisms are potentially in that foam. That part of it is really fascinating in terms of we know a whole lot more about foams a year later than we did in the early inception of when we were doing this work. Next slide. Here are 3 samples collected from Van Etten Lake. These are shoreline foam samples. That prominent peak by VEL 14, folks will recognize that peak right there. And then what we're showing here, there's 3 separate samples, and each sample is divided into 2 samples. So there is a surface water foam sample. So that first bar is showing a foam sample from Van Etten Lake, that's sample 12. And then next to it is the concentrations of PFAS in water. Now, that's showing a relative percent of different compounds, so it adds up to 100. And if you look at these samples, the predominant chemical you see both in the, usually in the foam, is PFOS. Now, the take home here is we see much higher concentrations of most of the chemicals in the foam as opposed to the water. Now, the reason, and there's a lot written on this, the reason being these chemicals tend to be, they're like bobbers, they're like fishing bobbers, where they like to work at the interface of water and air. So the tail of the compound wants to be in the air, the head wants to be in water. So they have a proclivity, they want to be in these foamy interfaces. So that's what we call fractionation, it's a technical term. That's not all that important, but what is important is the fact that we have many orders of magnitude higher concentrations in the foam compared to the water. Next slide. So there's a lot depicted here in this these series of graphs. What I want to point out here is off to the left, that's what we call a logarithmic scale, and those are concentrations. So it's an exponential scale. So you've got 1 times 10 times 100 times 1,000. And the reason we do that, if we just did this as pure concentrations in a linear scale, the range of these compounds is so great for all these different chemicals that you would not even see the detail in for some of these compounds because they're so relatively low. So what's important to look at here again is the blue bars are showing relative concentrations in the foam. The maroon bars are shown with some water. So there's a lot higher. In some cases, it's 1,000, 10,000 times higher in the foams. That's an enrichment process. We're learning more about what causes that. It's dependent upon the chemicals. It's dependent upon different environmental conditions. So these are really complex mechanisms that play with the fractionation into the foam or transfer into the foam. Next slide, please.
Hey, Barry, this is Sue. I wanted to mention, if it's
Thanks,
all
Sue.
right with you, the results that are on the left of the screen are the Rogue River. This might be hard to see if someone's on a smaller screen. We go Rogue River, Thornapple, Huron, and then we get to Van Etten.
Yep, that's correct.
And then we have Lake Marguerite, and then we have Cedar Lake.
That's correct. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Sue. That's a key component there because this is showing the geographical spread from different samples that we've collected different places. And it's important to recognize that only a few of these locations are Van Etten, or these compounds are Van Etten Lake. Thank you. Next slide, please. So I'm showing a picture here, and it's a slice of this very stable mousse-like foam. And this foam there actually is some rigidity to it, and these foams eventually do collapse. So one of the things that folks have a question is like, well, who cares if there's bacteria or fungi in these foams? Well, the thing about that is many of these primitive organisms, bacteria included, mushrooms, will produce natural soap-like compounds, detergents, or what we call surfactants. And an example are you've got naturally occurring soaps that are in the environment. Well, some of these lower life forms will also produce surfactants. So we really wanted to understand that, and that helps us understand the origin or the signature and the makeup of these foams. Now, the question that people have is, well, why is there fungi in these foams? Next slide, please. So fungi, we probably have folks that are morel mushroom hunters, and the morels propagate through, they drop spores, right? And I'm just using the morel because most people in Michigan know the morel mushroom. Well, there's tiny spores, and those spores can go airborne. And I'm just using morel as one example. But the fungi, what happens is you can have these spores that land on water. They're harmless. And what happens is they're on that surface tension of the water, and they can get caught up in the foam. That's just one, what we call aerial deposition, right? The other thing would be you can actually have bacteria in water, right? And that's venting to the surface water. So you have all these different, you can have a good rainstorm, and it's washing what's in the soil in the rivers and lakes. So that's what we call terrestrial overland transport. So all of those mechanisms are ways that bacteria and the fungi get into the foams. Next slide. So the question is why, who cares about, we're dealing with Pfas with very, low toxicological thresholds, and then we're dealing with bacteria and fungi. The thing about it is, in general, humans have adapted to a lot of different types of bacteria, but it's a good idea not only to stay clear of the foam because of the chemical constituents, but also there's a bacteria component as well, right? So the idea you do a sweep, now in the days of COVID, we're careful about touching our eyes and that kind of thing. It's the same thing with these foams. You really want to stay clear, not only due to the chemical, but the biological aspects. The other important thing is we're understanding that how these foams are created. We think that there's a detergent, natural surfactant solvency going on with these chemicals in the water from fungi and bacteria. We think that's adding to the foaming. That's a work in progress. Right now, that's a reasonable model that we have. We'll learn more as we collect more data and other scientists collect more data. I think got a couple more here. So one of the things that we like to do are we create these illustrations, these graphical models, and it allows us to talk to folks in the community. It allows us to communicate with regulators and academics and scientists. And we create these visual tools. This is done in a software, Adobe Illustrator. And what we've worked up here is how are these foams transported on open water? And this is a good model. This model was actually developed for Lake Van Etten. And then what we're pretty certain is you get a baby foam, a nucleus. We call them foam nuclei that develop out in the lake. They could be offshore a ways. And then what happens is these little baby foams aggregate, right? And as the wind pushes these guys along, they tend to develop into a larger foam. And what happens is these foams develop a peak. It's like a little bit like a sail, right? So what does that do? That creates a surface area where these foams can move around primarily due to wind. Now, as they get closer to the shore, you're in a zone, we call this the littoral zone, but that's a technical term for the zone of beach interaction, the wave break. And then what happens is these foams get incorporated onto the beach, right? So it's a very complex mode of transport that's largely wind driven. There's some other processes occurring with the nearshore currents, right? In an inland lake, you're not really dealing with riptides or anything, but there is a nearshore current, and any fisherman will tell you that there if you're casting a lure out or a bobber out, you'll see these currents near shore, right? So where we've worked up a reasonable explanation for transport of surface water foams in lakes. When we get into rivers, it's different. And it's primarily because what does a river do? The river flows. So these foams are being transported in river systems largely through what we call advection, or the mass transport in the river. It's sort of like, think of a foam as a canoe, a family in a canoe going down river. That river's carrying that buoyant mass. And the other difference is you get turbulent conditions, right, on rivers. So you get these eddy pools, you get these swirling conditions to where that zone of agitation is particularly below spillways or dams. You get that foam churning up. It's like grandma whipping up eggs again, right, to make a foam, a meringue for a pie. It's a similar thing with incorporating that air into the foam. So we're getting closer to understanding transport, both in rivers and lakes. This is all presented in this study that we've completed. Next slide. Some of the key points here is this hand dipper method works actually better than you would do with just going down with your hand and scooping. It eliminates exposures. We can safely go in. We can cover a lot of ground by using extension pole to grab samples. The PFAS signature in the foams and the water do suggest there's a site-specific nature. So at different locations, the Thornapple River foam looks different chemically and biologically than, say, Lake Marguerite or Van Etten Lake. So chemically, they're different, right? Now, there may be certain predominant compounds that are common, but generally that fingerprint is different in different locations. There's definitely an enrichment process that's occurring, right, with more concentrations in the foam than in water. Next slide. What we find regarding transport in inland lakes, the foams are usually, they accumulate downwind along shoreline features, and things like snags, logs, different things, or coves, or certain sheltered areas can increase where those foams accumulate. Sometimes they'll just accumulate on the long shore of the beach, but that is primarily a wave and wind driven phenomenon. Rivers is different, like as I said. The hard part for us as scientists has been, and just folks in general, some of the folks up in Oscoda will say, hey, there's foam out on the lake. And I was on some of those texts, and it's like, okay, let's mobilize. So we mobilize, and then we get up there. You know, when I say mobilize, we actually go out in the field to collect the foam. A lot of times that foam dissipates, and it's gone in the matter of hours. So it's really a challenge. There's a bit of an unpredictable nature as to when these foams occur. We are looking at weather conditions, favorable, right? Is it going to be a windy day? You know, is there a low pressure system come in? Does that affect the foam? So we're looking at all these options to better understand when foam is going to come up. I think those are key points. And then as we get into Q&A, we can dial in some more. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Barry. Our next presenter is Puneet Vij, who is the toxicologist with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Puneet.
Thank you, Sue. So good evening, everyone. My name is Puneet Vij, and I'm a toxicologist with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. As most of you might already be aware of MDHHS role, I'll go over it one more time for the newer audience. So our primary role is to understand the health concerns facing the community. We closely work with EGLE and other agencies to investigate these PFAS sites. With EGLE, we develop a plan to investigate and address health risks, where EGLE leads the site investigation and MDHHS and local health department leads the public health planning and response. We also evaluate PFAS exposure to residents in the community and recommend any public health action as needed. Next slide, please. Most of what we already know about the toxicity of PFAS comes from studies of two specific compounds, PFOA and PFOS. Adverse health effects have been established in epidemiological and laboratory animal studies for these PFAS chemicals. This slide provides some of the adverse health effects in humans associated with higher PFAS exposure, which includes reduced fertility, increasing the chance of high blood pressure or preeclampsia in pregnant women, where preeclampsia is a pregnancy complication characterized by high blood pressure, small decrease in the infant birth weight, and increased cholesterol levels, especially total and low density lipoprotein cholesterol. Next slide, please. The other adverse effects include increasing the chance of thyroid disease and liver damage, decrease in the immune response to vaccines, and increased chances of cancer, especially kidney and testicular cancers. Next slide, please. As you all might already know, there are many applications of PFAS. So this slide explains different routes of PFAS exposure. The most significant route of exposure is ingestion, which is mostly through drinking PFAS contaminated water. It can also be through eating fish or wild game caught from a contaminated water body. So we evaluate PFAS levels in fish fillet, along with other chemicals, and issue fish consumption guidelines as needed, which would include a do not eat advisory if PFOS levels are really high. The other sources includes incidental swallowing of PFAS contaminated soil or dust, eating food out of packaging materials that contains PFAS, and use of consumer products that contains PFAS. Research is still ongoing, but the current science indicates that skin contact with PFAS is not typically a concern, as these chemicals are not easily absorbed through skin. Next slide, please. As most of you are familiar about MDHHS screening levels, MCLs, and MDHHS comparison values, I'll try to explain these terms a bit more. MDHHS developed screening levels in April 2019, and screening level is the amount of a chemical at or below which there is a small to no risk of health effects in the people who are exposed. In July 2019, the Science Advisory Group developed health-based values for the development of PFAS MCLs under MPART's executive. These are the proposed MCLs, and they were finalized in August 2020 and is being used to regulate and enforce PFAS levels in drinking water in Michigan. The MDHHS comparison values are the lowest of these two, screening levels and approved MCLs. And we use this lower value to guide our public health recommendations. As a result, data above these comparison values often triggers a precautionary public health response, such as distribution of filters in this case. Next slide, please. The MDHHS resampling effort is to understand PFAS fluctuations in drinking water wells. Currently, we finished the first round of resampling, and our plan is to start another round of resampling sometime this spring. So we have collected samples from 277 wells out of 427 wells in the Oscoda area that were previously tested by EGLE. Out of these, we have 136 non-detects and 141 detections. Out of these 141 detections, there are 20 detections that exceeds our MDHHS comparison values. Also, by now, you should have received your well results as well as the recommendation in the mail. And if for some reason you haven't received the letter in the mail, please contact me, and my contact information will be at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. So recently, EGLE received results from 2020 fish sampling done in Clark's Marsh. In Clark's Marsh, bluegill and pumpkin seed fish were collected in 2020, and results that were received were lower in 2020 when you compare it to 2011. However, they are still elevated and above the do not eat advisory screening value. This is also the first time analyzing yellow perch from the marsh, and concentrations were similar to that of bluegill and pumpkin seed fish, and also above the do not eat advisory screening value. Next slide, please. So in 2018, Michigan Department of Health and Human Services issued a do not eat advisory for deer taken within approximately 5 miles of Clark's Marsh in Oscoda Township. This advisory is due to high levels of Pfas found in single deer from the Clark's Marsh, which borders the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base. MDHHS also recommends you not to eat kidney or liver of any deer throughout the state because Pfas or other chemicals can build up in these organs. 44 deer were sampled from an area within 5 miles of Clark's Marsh, and deer were harvested from this within 5 miles of marsh, which represents a typical approximate range of travel for deer that may have a potential exposure to Pfas by drinking contaminated surface water. And as of now, we are evaluating the results and will be shared accordingly. Next slide, please. This slide explains the updates on Oscoda area exposure assessment. Right now, we are in the beginning stages of exposure assessment planning. We have formed a project team, which includes a toxicologist, an epidemiologist, community engagement coordinator, and a health educator. We had our follow-up meeting to the listening session in December 2020, and we are in a process of forming our community advisory team. In this exposure assessment, MDHHS will ask for a blood sample, and we will test it for Pfas analytes. And before the blood draw, participants will take a short survey about the ways they are getting exposed to Pfas. Also, we'll keep the community informed as we make progress in the exposure assessment. Next slide, please. I'll give it back to Sue.
All right.
Thank you.
Puneet, thank you very much. To move on to the Q&A session. And before we do that, we have just a short poll we'll ask you to take. And we are interested to know, since we can't see you anymore and aren't sure what kind of participation we are having at our virtual meetings, we're just curious to know how many people might be watching this meeting with you. If you are interested in helping us try to figure that out, this is not something you have to respond to, obviously, but if you wouldn't mind sharing with us how many people are watching, and we'll give you just a minute or so to do that. And Les, are we seeing some results coming in?
Yes, with 72% of the votes in, we have about 83% of our viewers are watching alone. 14% are viewing with another person,
Okay.
and about 3% are viewing. Actually, there's one person that's viewing with 4 other, so a total of 4 people. So.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone who responded to the poll. We appreciate that. All right, so let's move to our Q&A session. We do have some questions that have come in already, and I'll just ask that you pose one question at a time, and we want to be sure we get to everyone's questions here. So we do have some questions that I will read, and also Les is going to give you instructions again on how to ask a question in Zoom. So Les, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Sure. Just a quick reminder to everyone, please feel free to type your questions in. We've had several that have come in during the presentation, so I know everyone's looking forward to hearing those answers. If you want to verbally ask a question, please use the hand icon at the bottom of your screen that was demonstrated earlier in the presentation. And we have 3 individuals on the phone. And so those that are on the phone, if you want to try, do *9 to electronically raise your hand to ask a question. We will try that out too.
All right, thanks, Les. All right, let's get started with our questions here. And we have a question from Arnie. Can you tell us who will be presenting and which agencies? Is there an agenda? Arnie, there was an agenda on a slide at the beginning of the presentation, and I believe I went over the agenda at the start of the meeting, which showed which agencies were presenting. And then you also wanted to know which agencies are in the meeting and which managers. I think that's your question. So with us today, we have EGLE, we have MDHHS, District 2 Health Department wants us to know that they apologize that they can't be here tonight. They have a mass vaccination clinic and are tied up with that event this evening. In terms of managers that are at the meeting, we do have Mike Neller from EGLE. We have Andrea Keatley from MDHHS. I cannot see all the participants at the moment. Just give me a second here. Ann Person, John Bradley, Tammy Newcomb is attending the meeting with the DNR. So that hopefully answers your question. And the next question is from, oh, I saw a question from Connie that I'm not seeing at the moment. So let me try to find that one. All right, Connie has a question. Do the Ziploc bags contain any PFAS constituents? Barry, I think that might be a question for you. Well, and Connie has another question. So I think you can answer this first one quickly. Let's do that. Do the Ziploc bags contain any PFAS?
Yeah, so as I'm speaking here, I see all these questions that got pinged here on the text feed. So the Ziploc bags, Ziplocs are made of low density. Let me take my video off here so people can see my face. The bags are made of low density polyethylene. And those bags, it's a food grade polymer, right? And a long time ago, we vetted out use of those bags by doing equipment blanks and field sampling blanks to verify if there's PFAS. And we also periodically do that on each of the jobs to verify, is there cross contamination? And that's a great question because we found that there are certain polymers, right? Teflon polymers, different things you got to be really careful about because of cross contamination. But Ziplocs don't appear to be a problem. Now, you do have some other formulations on these zip style bags. So if we get into this some kind of low grade cheapy bag, right, we would always vet that out by doing what we call blank. You know, we'd run water over that bag and then analyze what's in it.
Okay, and
Thank you. That's a great question.
Also from Connie, when you collect the surface water samples, do you collect at the surface of the water or 2 feet below?
Yeah. So I had to pull a report. I'm not the field person, but I helped construct the sampling and analysis plan. So the water samples are collected 2 to 6 inches below the foam. There's some constraints as to where you're sampling. So sometimes it can get precarious if you're on a riverbank on a steep inclination to safely get a dipper under that foam. So there's some challenges with one, avoiding cross contamination, right? You don't want to dip through the foam and then collect the water sample. So there's certain field practices that we adhere to. Now, in the case of a beach, right, say at Van Etten Lake, so we're sampling there along the shore. So we're limited as to how much water we have there, right? So we're trying to keep it between 2 and 6 inches, somewhere right in that zone. During the peer review of the study, this study went to various academics at Michigan State, different universities. There was a professor down at Western, did a peer review. There were regulators in other states looked at it. One of the questions that came up was related, the whole, where did you sample? And there's this zone, we call it the micro layer, that's right at the interface. But this gets to be a bit impractical. How do you get in and you're using like tiny little dippers to pull water in this micro layer? So we looked at this from a commonsensical, practical way to collect water and collect foam. But that's another great question. Thank you.
And Barry, another question for you.
Yep.
Total PFAS is the sum of the 41 compounds?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, great. Thank you. While I've got you, Barry, one more question for you. On one of the slides, surface water 2 and the duplicate, there was about an 11,000 part per billion
Yep.
difference in the
Yep.
PFAS concentration. Doesn't that suggest an issue with quality assurance or quality control?
Yeah, so that's a great observation. I want to double back. I want to look into the report, and I want to check our lab. I want to check with the lab quality control, because you have a field quality assurance. You know, are we doing procedures the same way, you know, out when we're in the stick sampling? But then there's another, it's a lab quality assurance. And that's a valid point. I can't answer it right now. I want to look at it. We'll probably get Jim Bazell and I would imagine Paul Doran Bogdan into looking at that. And I suspect there might, you know, I don't want to speculate, but I suspect it's something related to the lab reporting, but I may be wrong. So we'll look into that. And that's a great observation. Thank you.
Okay. And Jim and Doran are both with AECOM, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. Puneet, this question might be for you. You say deer sampling evaluations are underway. What does that specifically mean? When are the results to be released? I'm aware that hunters were active in Clark's Marsh area this fall.
At this point, I don't have a timeline when the report will be released, but we are in a process of evaluating those results as we speak. So hopefully pretty soon the results will be shared.
Okay, thanks for that. And we
Hey,
do
Sue.
have, yeah,
Sue, I just want to make a quick announcement. We do have 3 hands raised, 2 of which are on the phone. I just want to make sure that our phone listeners are, I am aware that your hands are raised, so we will get to you shortly.
okay. Thanks for that, Les.
Yep.
I just wanted to mention that we have had for a few years now signs posted at Clark's Marsh advising people not to eat deer from the marsh. And then we issue press releases prior to hunting season. So we have that notification that goes out as well. So I just wanted to mention that. Yeah, Les, I am not seeing the hands, so.
Okay, under the attendees, I have phone number 729. Last 3 is 729. I can go ahead and allow them to talk. Go ahead, caller. Last 3 is 729. Unmute. Okay, unmute.
Yeah, looks like they might be muted.
They were unmuted. There we go.
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can
please.
you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Hi, thanks. Yeah, I was pressing the buttons while I was talking. Brian Haley, local. I've been here a long time. And what's bothered me, and I appreciate all you guys' work and the local people, and this is out of my league, but understanding water flow, that is within my purview because I've sailed these lakes. Now, as these pollutants go towards Lake Huron, in true degrees, they basically take a hard right with all of our water flow for surface water and subsurface water. And within 10 miles, of course, roughly speaking, and this has been going on for decades, we know now, with these pollutants. And that's a good flow rate. It's heading towards our intake for the Hushra. Now that's what, roughly a 30-inch water intake. So I can't imagine the hundreds of thousands of gallons that are going through there, servicing all of our communities. And I know that all you folks know all of this. But what's bothered me for years now is that basically what we're doing is sporadic testing there. And I just don't understand the wisdom in that. In your world, it's nothing, it's math, it's data collecting. And so for us to not do that, this is at the township level, the Oscoda Township Board level. So for $7,000 a year, we have that type of money here. We don't have to wait for grants. We don't have to wait to be told to do it or advised. We certainly shouldn't worry about what any state officials think about it. This is personal. This is where we live. And again, reiterating, I'm positive about all the work you guys do. I feel we need more pressure on the Oscoda Township Board to step up and direct roughly $7,000 a year, and I'm saying it's going to be for at least the next 20 years. We want all of those data points collected. So simply put, and then I can end on it, over the last 10 years, we've lost 10 years of data. We cannot go back and retrieve that. It's gone. And that's unacceptable to me, because at some point, there's going to be what we would call a super fund, I would imagine, because this is, as you folks know far better than me, this is spreading everywhere. The more you guys look, the more you find. So we're squandering our thought well, that's not the right word. We're missing all that data. We cannot replace it. It's imperative that we start collecting that data now. I'm not the fatalist where I think that those numbers are going to come back bad. What I do not appreciate is that when we do this, we're failing ourselves by not gaining knowledge. And if there are to be big-time monies released in whenever, we can only guess and hope. I want Oscoda, this is personal now, I want Oscoda to be first in line. That's what I want.
Yeah, we should have staff online who can talk about the hush resampling. Can someone from EGLE talk about the sampling that's been done of the municipal water supply and the sampling that's ongoing?
So it's Mike Jury. EGLE had a program for sampling Hushra monthly, and those results are on the MPART website. In fact, all surface water intakes that are on all of the Great Lakes, whether it be Lake Huron, Lake Erie, Superior, Michigan, are on the Pfas website, the MPART website. If you go there, you'll be able to look at all the data that's been collected on all the surface water intakes in Michigan. We appreciate the concern, and we had the same concerns. And so we did pay for, we the state paid for sampling of those intakes, of which Hushra was one of them. And the data is all there for you to see online.
Am I still on?
You
Am
are.
I still on? Yes. Okay, I understand that, and I talked a while, but I want our data points collected every month. I don't need it as a bulletin board type of thing. I want those data points collected at the Hushra that are servicing, obviously, Tawas, Oscoda, and the surrounding areas, not as alarm bells. I want us to be able to prove our point down the road when we go, if we're going to get in line to get big money to help eradicate this situation. So my earlier point stands. We've lost all that data. I understand the data you're talking about, and I appreciate that, sir, but that is sporadic data. That is not monthly data. We want monthly data. We don't want to connect the dots. We don't wish to gun deck down the road. I want us to be first and foremost in the collection of data like you're doing in other places. But we're not doing it. We're failing at is at Hushra. This is on the Oscoda Township Board at a cost of $7,000 a year. Anyone that lives here knows that we can afford $7,000 a year. And we should be doing that. That's on us, sir. It's not on you.
Well, I appreciate the comment. And as I said, what has been done, you're certainly welcome to go look at on the website.
And I have done so, sir.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I do. And I look at it, but you can see where you guys did have spikes, and then we don't test for a long, long time. Again, I guess I'm glad you interjected on this. I'm talking about every month, the raw, and I'm talking about the treated. That's what I'm talking about every month, and that's going to have to be ongoing for the next 20 years.
I've written down your comment, and that's something that we can discuss. So thank you for that comment.
Hey, thanks a lot for all your work. I mean that. I know I come direct, but I have to because, hey, when's the next time a guy like me is going to talk to you? So I appreciate everything you're doing, okay?
Appreciate your comments. Thank you.
All right.
Let's go to caller. The last three numbers are 586.
Callers unmuted on our end.
Caller, you may have to push *9 on your phone.
All right, there we go. Unmuted.
Sorry, I think I got it that time.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. I'm Beth Wallace. I'm with the National Wildlife Federation. And I just wanted to confirm, two comments, but I wanted to confirm prior to this year's advisory on venison, there's not sampling data that can indicate whether it's increased or not. And that's what's being evaluated currently.
Puneet, can you take that question? Puneet or Tammy?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that? I'm having some Wi-Fi issues.
For the deer advisory prior to this hunting season, this deer advisory was not issued because of elevated levels compared to previous years. It was just issued as a notice because of previous years, and you're still evaluating this year's samples. Okay, I just wanted to confirm that piece. And then the other thing I wondered, because of the foam samplings and the challenges that you all are facing in getting sampling, have you considered or would you consider being a part of or supporting a citizen science program that would help give citizens the tools they need in order to be of assistance to collect samples like this?
Barry or Mike?
Yeah, so in terms of, that's come up before because we'll get an announcement that, hey, there's foam located somewhere. In some areas we usually know, there's gonna be foam, but due to the unpredictable nature, we mobilize and we get out there and then the foam's gone. And that's causes a lot of frustration. Believe me, I get frustrated about it. I know Mike Jury does. So one of the things we thought about is, do we have the public help out with sampling? Now, there's some procedures with PFAS sampling related to cross-contamination, et cetera. And so it's not rocket science to go out with a net to collect some foam samples, but the procedures and the chain of custody documentation, the lab documentation, that's where it gets a little bit more tedious. But in terms of collective studies with universities and the public and even high school students, there has been advocacy for that in the past. I'm getting into the realm I probably should let Mike or folks from EGLE comment on, but I think that's a great point. It's an interesting point to collaborate, certainly. Mike?
Well, one of the questions I would have is the conditions that the sample was taken under.
Yeah.
So one of the, not that I would say anybody would do anything to make a sample be something that it's not, but that would be one issue we would have. Another issue would be getting it to the lab in a timely manner and making sure that Connie asked a question earlier about equipment blanks and the sort. So we would have to look at that. We'd have to look at the funding source to do that, do the training, do the other. It's not a bad idea. I think Mike Neller, the director for RRD, is on. And so if Mike has a couple comments on that, we certainly would love to hear them. But there are some issues that we would have to go over and make sure that the sampling was done correctly, that appropriate blanks and other types of quality assurance, quality control were done. So not saying it couldn't be done, just saying that there would be a few obstacles that likely could be overcome. And the other issue, of course, is personal safety, personal hygiene, doing that in a manner that does not expose the person in question doing the sampling to the potential bacterial problems, potential PFAS issues. And then the question, I hate to bring this one up, but the lawyers always ask it, what kind of liability does the state have when somebody does one of these samples and they get sick later? Who's responsible for that? Who's liable? Who's whatever? So that would be another thing that would have to be looked at and somehow answered. Not throwing logs in front of you, but just want to say that a program like that would have to be well thought out and well put together to get data that is meaningful, that we can use in a manner that advances the science on foam. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
I would just say that we've had some other citizen science type things that have been done in the past that some turned out good, some not so good. So to do it right, though, would be something that needs to be thought through, put together, a video, whatever would need to be done. So not throwing it out of hand, just saying that it has to be well designed and well done.
Yeah, and Beth, I captured your comment. I've written that one down too. So we'll, something we could talk
Appreciate
about.
it.
I wasn't sure if your question about the deer sampling, we do have data from previous sampling that was done. And that's when we issued the advisory. Was that your question?
Yeah, and my overall question is, have those levels risen since last year's release? Because in last year's release, there was actual information provided on the elevation. And this year's release was just a blanket release with no information on levels. So
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to nail down.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, when that report is issued on this most recent round of sampling, that should be available.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Let's go to, I have a caller. I'm going to jump back and forth here just a little bit. So we have a caller, Rex Vaughn. And Rex, I know you've typed in a couple of questions, so let's go to you. And then we'll get to our next hand that's been raised here.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
All right, I wanted to follow up on this citizen science sampling program. I want to make sure that everybody is aware that there is a long and well-established citizen science program called the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program that is run by the Michigan Lake and Stream Association, by MSU, has involvement from the folks at EGLE, that has a long and very solid history of sampling water in the Michigan lakes that would be an ideal framework and an in-place infrastructure to expand into PFAS foam testing. You want to take advantage of what's in place now, and you know, we got some pretty good folks working on that all over the state. Joe Lattimore at MSU is very much involved. Melissa DeSimone and Michigan Lake and Stream Association is very much involved in this thing, and it might be the logical place for training citizen scientists to collect PFAS foam. Matter of fact, every year we hold a training session as part of our annual conference to teach volunteers how to sample lakes for water quality. We're doing phosphorus. We're looking at chlorophyll concentrations. We're doing Secchi discs. We've got a very well-established program, and it would make sense to include that organization in expanding the citizen science program. If you guys want to go out and take a look at more foam samples in more places from folks that have been trained in how to collect it and how not to cross-contaminate in PFAS. So if there's an interest in that, I'd be glad to communicate that to MLSA and see how we could be of assistance.
Rex, that was called the Cooperative Lakes. What was it? again?
Cooperative Lakes, CLMP, Cooperative Lakes Management Program. I can send you more information on it. It's been around for well over 20 years. It does receive state funding, other than last year when everybody never got a nickel anyway, but that's different subject for a different time, usually with adult beverages involved. But anyway,
Okay.
there's a group out there that could step into this very quickly, and with Mike's tutelage could be very effective in helping out.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure EGLE is aware of the program. Okay, thanks for that, Rex.
Okay.
And you had typed in a question that I'm going to pose now, and it was asking for the status of fish testing in Cedar Lake.
Yeah, there was some initial results, as I recall, being posted, but there was a bunch of other samples that hadn't been tested yet. So I was curious as to where that is. Wait a minute, here's an answer from Mike. Oh, well, thank you, Mike. Appreciate that.
Yeah, that's probably not all of them, Rex. I'll have to check with Brandon Armstrong. I thought that they also did some other fish, but that's the fish that have gone through the lab, and that was pretty darn good news. So
Yeah,
I'm
they
happy
were
to
the
put
front.
that out there.
I think you had some. I think you had some perch in there. Didn't know if
Right.
there was any northerns or anything like that, but there was some unfinished tests the last time I asked about this.
Yeah, but I did have that information for you. As soon as Brandon sends me something, I'll get with you and get that information
Okay.
off to you and your group.
All righty.
And Mike, did you have a little bit that you could share with us about that? I know it sounds like you sent Rex some information.
No, I put it in the question and answers.
In the chat.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
in the so everyone could see it.
Yeah.
It was that bluegill and sunfish came back with no real issues. I think they were even below non-detect.
Right. Yeah, but you still had some species yet to be tested the last time we
Yes,
chatted about
I believe
this.
that's correct.
Okay, sounds good. And then Rex also wanted us to know that Ziploc bags are made in Bay City. So there we go.
Yep.
All right, let's go to another hand that's been raised for a while, and the name is Moody. So Les, can you unmute?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
That's not supposed to be Moody. This is Bob Delaney. But anyway, I have a question, I think for Amanda Armbruster. What happened with the Cedar Lake contamination? I know there was groundwater contamination up around Cedar Lake. It was considered a potential source for the contamination further south. Is EGLE, just because, or assuming that if there's no contamination above a criteria, then it's not an issue, and then if that's the case, is EGLE assuming that the highest levels have been found?
I guess I would need to know what samples specifically that you're referring to. We have surface water samples from Cedar Lake that are below our groundwater surface water interface criteria. So they're below 12 parts per trillion for PFOS. And then there are some monitoring wells, EGLE monitoring wells that we sample in the general vicinity of Cedar Lake. And I believe the wells that are closest to the lake have been below our cleanup criteria as well. So was there a particular location that you're referring to?
Yeah, that's well, that's the this frequently happens is people will put in a couple wells, find some contamination and assume that's the worst contamination in the area and stop investigating. Now, I can understand where the Cedar Lake, some of the residential wells up near Cedar Lake too, and that end had some, I think some small amounts. And I know some of the ponds we sampled had some PFAS in them as well. So the question is there a source up in that area? Is there more contamination? I realize this is a low priority area, but I was concerned that it was just dropped off the potential areas of concern.
Right. Okay. I understand more of your question. I wouldn't say that it's dropped off. There are still a few well locations that we have up there that we are sporadically testing. So those quarterly events that we do 4 times a year, those we've generally revisit some of those locations that haven't been sampled in a while, just to see if we get similar results or if we're seeing increases or decreases in some of those well locations that aren't in the actual Oscoda area sites. So I wouldn't say it's dropped off. We are still looking at it, but we didn't really have areas that showed that there was a,
Major problem.
significant source.
Yeah, I just remember that up at in the coal bath area for a long time, we didn't have anything above criteria, and then suddenly we did. So
yeah, and that's why we're doing that quarterly sampling. We're trying to cover a good subset of wells and eliminate the huge data gaps if we can, to keep track
Yeah.
of.
Bob, you know those wells as the bound to plume wells. Those are the wells that Amanda is talking about. Amanda and myself also have done multiple drive rounds of the lake looking for sources that may cause the contamination. And one of the areas that we did look at was the old township dump, and found a little bit there, but not enough to really say that that is a source into Cedar Lake. So we do look, we continue to look, and we continue to work with the locals to try to find out if they know of something that could be historically causing the contamination. So no, we haven't given up on it. And the bound to plume wells do get sampled. We do quarterly sampling, and we pick wells from those to go ahead and take samples out of. So we continue to collect data, continue to look at it. But that's a really difficult question. We have not been able really to come up with something that you can point your finger at and say, hey, there's the source.
Yeah.
And we haven't yet, but we'll continue to look.
yeah, that's fine. I just I know it's a low priority because you've got so many other things on your plate that you just in the Oscoda area, but just want to make sure it was still there. I have other questions, but I'll wait my turn for ask them.
Sue, are you there, Sue? Looks like we may have temporarily lost Sue. Okay, while we wait for Sue to come back, I'm going to switch over here until Sue returns. I have a question for Mr. Mitchell. The presentation is being recorded. What would you anticipate being when this will be sent out? Okay, so in the chat, I sent a message out to everyone. All the recordings for the past Oscoda meetings are recorded, and those are stored in 2 locations. You can find those on the Impart Oscoda website. That's one location. And then the second location is EGLE's YouTube channel. So you can check those 2 locations for the recordings for the past meetings, for all the virtual meetings we've had that we've held going back to the start of the pandemic. So from about April forward, you should be able to find those meetings. Sue, are you back?
I am. Apologies. My laptop decided to shut off.
Okay.
Great.
So I answered a question for Mr. Mitchell regarding the recording, and so I'll return it back to you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm only seeing one question less.
Oh, so you must have lost. Okay. All right. Next question. let me move this over so I'm not looking sideways. Next question is, can you get exposed through nonstick pans?
Okay, I can take this one too.
Go
So in terms of non-stick pans, but not at the concentrations that can be harmful to human health. But I also want to add one point. These days, these non-stick pans are also coming as P4 and P4 free.
And they have substituted another type of PFAS, though, I believe, in some cases for PFOS and PFOA.
Okay, thank you, Puneet. Next question that was submitted by an attendee is, the first part of this presentation went over the first phase. What does the second phase of the process entail, and when will it be completed? This is a two-part question.
Hi, were you talking about the Wurtsmith portion? Is that what you think?
Sure. They're asking about the first phase, and they want to know if there's a second phase and when will that begin or will be completed.
Okay, I'll take that for the Wurtsmith portion anyways. And then if Amanda thinks that it pertains to her, she can jump in with that as well. So the first two slides that I presented were on the interim remedial actions. Now those can happen at any point in the CERCLA process. So those are interim remedies. And those are the first two remedies, or they're currently planning those remedies. And then also at Wurtsmith, we're moving through the CERCLA process, looking at a final remedy or long-term remedy. And so that's something that's still to come after the remedial investigation phase and the risk assessment. Then there'll be a feasibility study if that's deemed appropriate here, and then move on to the final a record of decision or decision document, and then on to the remedial, the final remedy.
Okay. The second part of that question is, what is the goal of each phase in regard to reduction of the PFOS and to PFAS and PFOS?
Sure. And so with the interim remedial actions, Air Force's goal, and again, there's a restoration advisory board meeting tomorrow that may be helpful for folks who would like to ask Air Force directly. But the goals of those are to, in those two areas near Air Force Beach and then near FTO2 up gradient of Clark's Marsh, Air Force's goal is to capture more of the highest concentrations in those areas and then transport that water or capture it into the existing treatment systems in order to reduce PFAS concentrations in groundwater. And the goal will be to meet the effluent limits established under the substantive requirements document under Part 31. As far as the final remedy, which would be later on in the process, and again in the feasibility study, you would look at remedial alternatives, eventually go through a decision document, a proposed plan and decision document again for that final remedy, and you would be looking to see which requirements would apply to those remedies. And that's more when we've talked about ARARs a lot. And so that's when we'll be looking at those values to make sure that the state requirements are also applicable if appropriate.
Okay. Thank you, Beth. Next question. Before I read the next question, I just want to remind those of you who have your hands up, I do see you, and I'll jump back over to those here shortly. Has EGLE, next question, has EGLE received the Air Force's interim remediation proposal from the Air Force for the Air Force Beach plume?
No, we haven't received that yet. And it's from our schedule. When I went through the presentation, I mentioned late January. It's actually due, we anticipate on receiving it tomorrow per the schedule, but I believe we'll receive it soon.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Beth. Puneet, this question, I'm going to read part of it, but not all of it. But hopefully you can see it in the question. The question concerns well testing. Our Loud Drive well was tested in June 2020, just received results, and tests did not detect or find any PFAS in drinking water well. That's in quotes. Will we need to continue to use bottled water due to the possibility that the flow of the PFAS will continue to migrate and contaminate the well as time goes on? Question.
Okay, I have your address as you mentioned it here, so I have your phone number. So I can give you a call first thing tomorrow morning, and then we can discuss the recommendations, the results you have this time, and because it's a resample, and we can discuss why this recommendation is there. So I can give you a call first thing tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Puneet. Puneet, I have another question for you. For DHHS. Because deer sampling was delivered to the lab in August 2020, when were lab quality assured results delivered to the DNR, DHHS, and RRD at EGLE?
So we received the data in October 2020, and after we received the data team began the review, the QA process, and the data analysis process. That's what we started after that. And the deer data was provided to EGLE this month, and analysis of the data is still in the process for the final report to be released when it's going to be complete. So we will share that final report. I don't have the timeline as I mentioned, but this is the timeline when we received the data and when we provided it to EGLE, and we are still in the process of evaluating the results so that we can generate a final report.
Okay. Thank you, Puneet. I think this next one, part of this question is for you, but if it's not, just let me know. Why can't we be told that there were or not more deer above do not eat? There's a question about whether or not more or less deer exceed the do not eat order.
At this point, I can tell our highest sample is still from a single deer that prompted our do not eat advisory. But more of the data will be shared as we finish that final report.
Okay, thank you, Puneet. The next question is for EGLE staff. The question is, because the United States Air Force has started negotiating their risk assessment, scoping, and identifying data gaps. Okay, this is, I think there's a question. I don't see the question in the, it concerns the United States Air Force negotiating their risk assessment and scoping and identifying data gaps. Beth, you want to take that?
Sure. Hey, Arnie. As far as that one, the Air Force is going to be submitting their remedial investigation work plan and then a separate risk assessment work plan as part of the remedial investigation. And we have been sharing the data that we have, the fish data, the deer data collected so far, and we plan to also share the new deer data with Air Force so they can incorporate that data into their risk assessment. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Next question. This is for Amanda. For the United States Air Force's interim remedial action plan, how does the Air Force propose to remediate the PFAS contaminants in the lake and marsh and other areas contaminated by the base?
I'll let Beth take
that one.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Beth.
Yep, no problem. And just Amanda's the project manager for the Oscoda area sites, and then I'm the project manager for the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base for EGLE. So I know there's a lot of overlap here, but I'll take this one. And so for the U.S. Air Force's interim remedial action plan, how does Air Force propose to remediate PFAS contaminants in the lake and marsh and other areas contaminated by the base? So for right now, there's 2 interim remedial actions that Air Force is planning. currently at the base. And so those are to expand near Clark's Marsh. There'll be an expansion of the FTO2 treatment system. So additional extraction wells to capture additional water and run it through the FTO2 treatment system. And so there may be, there'll likely be expansion or upgrades to that system and potentially infiltration gallery upgrades there as well. For the Van Etten Lake Air Force Base interim remedial action, it's also a series of extraction wells. The last presentation we saw that it was to perform a hydraulic barrier there right along Air Force Beach. And that water, PFAS concentrations will be pumped back to the central treatment system. And there may be a slight expansion to that system as well, but it's a system that's already in place. As far as other areas of contamination on the base, those will come during the completion of the remedial investigation and the feasibility study, and then in the final remedy. And along the way, I know that we'll be looking at other opportunities for to ask Air Force for additional interim remedial actions if those arise. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Beth. So I have Beth or Sue. I don't know if what you can see yet in terms of questions and hands that have been elevated, but I have 4 hands that are new questions, and then I have 2 additional hands that were a repeat question. So I want to get the new ones first.
Yep, let's go to Kathy.
Okay, just a moment. Okay, Kathy, you should be unmuted.
Oh, thanks, Les.
You're welcome.
Hey, it's Kathy Woosterbarth in Oscoda. I wanted to just mention to Paneet that you keep reporting that dermal exposure of PFAS containing water is not a concern, although there's limited studies, from my understanding, regarding this. So why is the state of Michigan continually stating this, which I believe shows lack of concern for protective measures of Oscoda citizens? And I request that Paneet and the state note when talking about dermal exposure that they differentiate between foam exposure and surface water exposure. And in doing so, caution for exposure of PFAS containing foam, which we have signs indicating that in our area, and note that limited studies exist for surface water dermal exposure. Can you all help me out with that?
Hi, Kathy. This is Puneet. So our foam advisory is driven by incidental ingestion, and the wording in the presentation is because of lack of studies, definitely not because of lack of concern. And we are looking into more studies if there is, and we are looking into if there is any dermal exposure associated. But for now, yes, there is no dermal exposure. That's why I mentioned it's typically not a concern, but I definitely want to mention it's not because of lack of concern.
Okay, so you don't agree to be to have this, you know, when you're talking to Oscoda citizens about the water, even though there are limited studies, you still want to say that there's not a concern?
No, I'm just telling there are lack of studies. As you mentioned, I believe it shows lack of concern for the Oscoda citizens. I'm telling in that way. It's not lack of concern for the Oscoda citizens. It's just because there are limited studies. I mentioned that.
Right. So, but because there's limited studies, you should advise people not to touch it.
Well, Puneet, are you saying based on the studies that are available, dermal exposure does not appear to be a concern?
That's what I'm saying, yes.
So based on the science that's available, we're not seeing that dermal exposure is a concern with the levels that we're seeing in surface water.
Yes, and as more studies will be available, this might get updated, yes. But I want to mention our foam advisory is driven by the incidental ingestion that can happen.
Well, it does include washing the foam off if you touch it. So.
To
Yes,
avoid,
that's as a precaution. Yes.
and that's to avoid hand to mouth contact. So that's again, ingestion. So foam on hands, especially for little kids who might be playing in the foam, we wouldn't want them then to put their hands in their mouth and swallow any PFAS that might be on their hands.
Exactly.
All right, I think you understand what my concern is. I believe that you should be you should have more protective language in your presentations and in what you're saying, because we do not know whether dermal exposure is a concern. So,
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, for your comment.
Let's go to Greg. Les, can you unmute Greg?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Greg.
Okay, thanks, Les and Sue. I wanted to follow up with a previous comment made by one of the residents here in Oscoda, probably on Loud Drive there. They said that their well was, come back non-detect, and they wondered if they should continue to get testing done and can go ahead and drink the water. And Paneet said that he would get back with that resident. Well, I think that, and I think the Now Group, who I represent, thinks that you should put that out to the whole community. Anybody that's on the lake or in this area that, once Paneet decides how to answer the resident that called in, everyone should know if, Paneet thinks it's okay to go ahead and drink water after it's been tested. I think that I'm just throwing that out there. I would like to see Paneet follow up with the whole community. Thank you.
I mentioned that I'm going. I'm sorry. I mentioned that I'm going to call the resident because the recommendations are based on the area. So I don't want to confuse anyone by if somebody's asking me if it's a non-detect, if I'll tell water is good enough to drink. I don't want to tell this to everyone. It depends on the area of concern. That's the only reason I thought if I'll call the resident directly, that's a good idea.
And Greg, I have quite a few PFAS sites around the state, and we're resampling at some of them. And we're not changing our recommendations yet based on one round of sampling. So for the sites where we've recommended filters in the past, we want to see several rounds of sampling before we make any recommendations to come off of a filter. So at this point, it's still a precautionary recommendation if you've got a filter to stay on it. Yeah, we don't want to take anybody's filter away based on just one round of sampling. Puneet, do you think that's accurate?
That is accurate. And the next round of resampling is going to happen this spring.
Yeah, so we'll be sampling again in the Oscoda area this spring, and then likely again. Does that help, Greg?
Hey, Greg, can you try unmuting your mic again?
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, sorry. I thought that was a unique question. It does answer it, what you said, Sue. But I'm glad you're on that, because I wouldn't want to see, people drinking water, and I'm sure that's the way you feel about it. But when I heard the question, I thought we better be careful with, when we follow up with these well tests, that the people aren't going off their filters just because they're no detect.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Yep. And we don't want that either. Yeah. Thanks for asking that question, Greg.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to go to a couple more hands raised here unless I still can't see all of the questions. So I don't know if we have any that have been posed for a while now.
I have showing on the screen since you were out and back. I have a total of 9. Actually, there's 8 because there's just one comment, like a thank you, but there's like 8 open questions. And then there are 3 new hands that are elevated and 2 repeat hands that are elevated.
Can you unmute Bill Farrell? Because I think Bill has something to add to the question that was just asked. And Bill Farrell is with MDHHS.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Bill.
Hi, my name is Bill Farrell. I'm a manager of the Environmental Site Contamination Unit. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of questions. The first one's the resampling residential wells. As Sue mentioned, we're doing this at most of our PFAS sites across the state. And again, when we talk about resampling, we're resampling over a period of time, and we're resampling several different times because we want to get an idea of what potential long-term exposures could be. So what we're doing is we're going to take that resampling data, and not just the residential well resampling data, we're also looking at monitoring well data. We're looking at what EGLE and understands with respect to the conceptual site model for these particular sites. So we're going to take a look at all of that data collectively. And then we're going to start to look at trying to make determinations as far as long-term exposures and whether people still need to remain on filters or if they no longer need to use them. But again, that's after we've done several rounds of sampling and after we've been able to look at both the data that's collected through the investigations and the data that we collect through resampling, looking at all that information collectively to make these final determinations. So as we're doing the resampling, as we go from round to round, for the most part, we continue to make the same recommendations. And then the other thing I wanted to follow up real quickly on was the dermal exposure issue. I think the way we typically try and couch it is that dermal exposure is typically not a concern. And we say that within the context of relative exposures. The reason we say that dermal exposure typically is not a concern because the information that we have so far indicates that dermal absorption is much less exposure relative to other exposure pathways like ingestion. So we're talking relative, but you're right. I mean, under certain conditions, dermal exposure could be a potential concern depending on the particular activity and the magnitude, the amount of the chemical that you're being exposed to. But for generally, what we like to say is that typically dermal exposure isn't a concern.
And I believe Abi Musa had looked at dermal exposure for Van Etten Lake. Is that correct, Bill?
Yes, we've looked at dermal exposure to surface water data and done our risk assessment approach. And we have not seen concentrations in the water that indicate potential concern. The foam, on the other hand, it's a little bit different because the foam has much higher concentrations of PFAS. But again, even with the foam, the major concern of exposure is ingestion of the foam. So we do recommend that after you've been exposed that you wash the foam off. But that in addition to just because of PFAS exposure, that's just kind of a general good hygiene practice in general too. So.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
I don't think we've heard from Arnie yet, although I read a couple of your questions, Arnie. So let's go to you. I do see you have a question about the deer results in writing, something Puneet said about 1 deer. And I believe what Puneet said was, we didn't see any results higher than that 1 deer that caused the advisory. Was that correct, Puneet?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And Arnie, or Les, if you can unmute Arnie.
I think, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, Puneet, okay, you didn't get something higher than the 554 or 45 parts per billion, but did you get any more deer that are over the do not eat? So that's question number one, clarify.
I think I think I can discuss that when the final report will be prepared, when it will be done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you shared the results with any of the other stakeholders, managers? Want to release?
The results were shared with EGLE this month.
EGLE, have you shared it with the Air Force?
Arnie, we're gonna give it to the Air Force. We haven't given it to them yet, but we want to give it to them so they can put it in part of their risk assessment, of course.
Okay, well then I strongly suggest that you give it to the public, or at least the RAB, our stakeholders, local, at the same time. Because we have a comment period coming up real quick on the Air Force's RI. It's only about 5 weeks away, I think. And this is huge that we know the extent and where are the data gaps, and is the Air Force going to take action? Especially the hunters who kill deer around or even in close by to Clark's Marsh. They need to know.
Yeah, and again, we do have the advisory recommending no one eats deer from Clark's Marsh, so that won't change. That
Well, that
will remain in place.
enough, because the deer, and Tammy confirmed this a year ago in DNR with me when I asked, can deer walk more than 5 miles off of Clark's Marsh? And she said, it is possible. So hunters hunting on County Line Road, less than 5 miles away, can shoot a deer following your advisory, and they're killing a deer that's been contaminated. Those results were quality assured laboratory in October. There's no reason that those lab results could not have been shared with remediation division and other stakeholders at that time, just to give them a warning. So I want to leave that. We'll see what happens.
Okay. Thanks, Arnie. We hear you.
Can I ask a different question of Penny and Barry on the foam?
Go ahead. We have other questions waiting, so yep, please go ahead.
Okay. For Barry, I want you to think about the micro layer and the enrichment factor and concentration. And I know you did not analyze that in your study that you did for the state, but we know that the DOD has a grant, and those results are going to be supposedly released in the spring.
Yep.
And you actually have an AECOM co-writer, co-researcher on that study with Jennifer Fields. For Puneet, I want you to remember that the micro layer, the surface layer, not the foam, is invisible. So therefore, your advisory for rinsing off does not work because they don't see it. It's like an oil slick, it's invisible until it comes up into the foam that they can see. So that advisory is going to be totally inappropriate when these results are released in the next in the next month or so. And I also gave you ingestion screening criteria that EPA had given another Air Force site in 2017. And I hope that you can pull that data out, those criteria, and start working on it, because this is going to come down crashing, because I predict from other studies that were done in China in 2008 that surface, micro surface layer can have concentrations in the 2 to 5,000 parts per trillion range. And that surface criteria that EPA gave P's was 2,000 parts per trillion.
Yeah, so Arnie, I'll comment on that. So the fellow that you referred to, I work with him every day. And back in the day when I worked in an office, he was 3 cubes down from me. So that surface micro layer that you referred to, there's quite a few different sampling techniques. The general approach is what we call adhesion samplers. And basically you're inserting a glass plate into that interface, pulling up, and then using a squeegee to remove that volume of water. And MPART and EGLE have both. We've looked into that. And so I work very closely with Doran as to that study that you're referring to. So that's something we've actually developed some conceptual models that not only look at the micro layer, but there's another layer called the Newston layer, which is a planktonic layer of biological activity that's a little bit thick, well, much thicker than the micro layer. So you bring up valid points. There are some hurdles with sampling that micro layer. It gets a little bit more challenging in terms of reproducing data, but your comment is well taken. I think it's a valid point to certainly look into the PFAS concentration at that interface.
Thank you, Barry. Appreciate
I also want to mention one point, Arnie, that the screening levels you're talking about that is from a different Air Force base is specific to that site. So we can't use those screening levels for Wurtsmith Air Force Base.
I can't accept that. I understand what you're saying. They are regional screening criteria. However, you guys have been pushing the envelope on doing pure research, and I highly hope that you can use these criteria and start looking at, do you have data gaps? Can you disprove that? And that was 3.5 years ago. So, and the Air Force has been avoiding looking at the foam since the summer of 2017, not even taking samples at Van Etten Lake until a 1.5 years ago under this study, but they don't give us the results. So we need action now, because now it's going to affect health and warnings and shutting down a beach or not, and shutting down hunting or not. This is serious, and this is all going to happen real quick. And I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks for sharing, Arnie. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Just one reminder with our foam advisory, we do recommend that people who come in contact with foam do bathe and shower after the day's activities. As you pointed out, Arnie, that there can be residual on the skin after rinsing in the lake. So we do recommend bathing and showering after the day's activities. Les, there was a question that I can't see at the moment, and I know it's been up there for a long time. Somebody wanted an update on the Purdue study. And if Tammy is still with us, I wonder if she could respond to that.
Okay, I will find the Purdue question. The Purdue question. Okay, can someone explain in detail what wildlife studies are being done at Clark's Marsh, I think by Purdue University? So let me see if I can find Tammy.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you, Tammy.
I'm going to stay off camera because I don't have good internet connection. So the Purdue study is looking at essentially a food web model of how PFAS may accumulate in the food web. So they're looking at samples of everything from algae all the way up through turtles. So after they had to pause their work because of COVID this year, they were able to get out in late summer and complete all of their sampling. So right now they are working up those samples in the lab and developing the model that would be used to look at how PFAS moves through the food web. Because right now we don't really understand, like, are there reservoirs of it? You know, what do turtles look like? We really have no information on turtles. So that's where that Purdue study is right now. When they have a meaningful update to get, they'll be happy to come back and give a presentation to the group. But it does take a while to get all of that worked up and to do then the analyses that go along with it.
Okay, thanks, Tammy. I'm going to hop over, and I think this is Bob Delaney with a hand raised, then we'll go back to our typed in questions. Can you unmute? It looks like Moody. Bless.
Hey, I'm here.
Go ahead, Bob.
All right, this question's for Beth and the EGLE team working with the Air Force. You know, I spent a lot of years looking at Air Force maps and Air Force's work, and there's been a lot to be, well, there's been a lot that has not been well done and hasn't reflected reality many times, and there have been many failed remedies at this site. And the question is that even now when I see maps from the Air Force, they're leaving out information. Their conceptual site model is totally missing a great deal of information and obvious transport mechanisms and extent of plume. What I want to know is EGLE's team relying on Air Force presentations, because what we see presented are Air Force maps and Air Force's interpretations. And I want to know if, in fact, EGLE is doing its own actual evaluation, or whether they're taking what the Air Force is giving and following that.
Yeah, Sue, I can answer that. Hey, Bob, how you doing?
Good. How about you, Mike?
All right. Well, as you know, we don't necessarily have unlimited resources, so we do try and strike a balance between not, doing double work, but at the same time, our staff, along with our contracted consultants at AECOM, we're running our own evaluation on top of what the Air Force is doing, so that we make sure that everything is lining up as we see it as best we can. So we're looking at these things with a questioning attitude, and there's clearly been some indications, or we've seen some data where maps didn't quite line up to what we thought that we saw in different presentations, and we've asked for that information on how they came up with those plume maps for example, to make sure that it all makes sense. So, I mean, our intention, my intention, is to make sure that they do their job in accordance with the CERCLA process to determine the nature and extent of contamination before they decide what they can do for some sort of remediation.
Okay, well, one of the things for the public, like deep concern, is like AECOM, EGLE's consultant did a study of discharge of Pfas plumes to the AECOM River along where the wastewater treatment plant and FTO2 were discharging. And it's quite dramatic. It's quite clear that Pfas is discharging from those areas into the AECOM River, which is an incredibly important fact, that the AECOM River is being impacted, that there's questions about, well, how did the fish get contaminated? Did it slip out of Clark's Marsh and get into the river, or what? Those kinds of questions. And it's pretty clear that the river itself is being directly impacted by those plumes. It would help the public to know that the EGLE team recognizes that these plumes are going out into the river. It's not just flowing out of the marsh. And so those kinds of things are creating serious doubt in the minds of the public about what EGLE is doing with regard to oversight of the Air Force. And so I just bring that up. You don't really have to answer that. It's just that when we're looking at these presentations and when we look at the the review of the work plan, RI work plan, we'll be doing it with a lot of understanding and knowledge, and we'll know what EGLE's up to as far as the quality of the work. So I trust that it'll be excellent.
Yeah, that's a good, I mean, one of the things, Bob, that I picked up on this meeting, you know, I mean, we see like, you know, if we go in and talk to the Now group, and then we do this town hall meeting, and then at the RAB, I mean, there's usually people that show up at all those things. And so as I'm listening to some of the questions and the comments, it's been clear to me that sometimes there are people on here tonight that may have never been to any of these presentations. And so often we talk with this notion that everybody's been briefed, and you know, that's clearly not the case. So that was one of my thoughts that I jotted down here, that, you know, maybe at another one of these, we need to come back in with some sort of overview or briefing of what's going on in total or whatever. So,
Okay.
but yeah, that's a good comment. Thank you.
Really appreciate that, Mike. Thank you.
And Mike, while we've got you, Tony Spaniola has a question for EGLE. The state of Michigan has indicated that the Air Force needs to have a greater sense of urgency at Wurtsmith. What is EGLE doing to press the Air Force to act more urgently?
Well, first of all, you know, I've been pretty public about saying that, you know, 6 to 10 months ago, and to be honest, I've not been unhappy with the progress that they're making, specifically on the interim response actions. Would I like them to be doing more? Yes. I talk to the Air Force AFCAC leadership routinely. You know, I have a commitment from them, as I've talked to my staff about. I want to be looking for other potential interim response activities. Beth mentioned that in her remarks. So we're always looking to move this along as quickly as possible, so we can get to a point where we can be done. And it's not going to happen overnight. We know that, but we need to keep pushing.
All right, thanks. We have a question from Ed that I'd like to get to, and I know we have a hand raised, and I will get to, I promise. But the question from Ed is, over time, these forever chemicals will be moving downstream. What do we know about water and biota levels of PFAS in Lake Huron? And that would be a question for EGLE.
Well, let me get a stab at it. So we had our folks from our surface water, our water resources division, have taken samples in Lake Huron on either side of the Oscoda River. And then also we've taken water samples in the river itself, the Oscoda River. So we do have some information. When you say Lake Huron, that's a real big place. So we don't have a huge amount of information on everywhere around Lake Huron. We have information that is based on sampling the surface water plants, I guess, for lack of a better term, municipal water systems that draw water out of Lake Huron. We have results from those. Those are on our website. I did put that in the chat, so you can link to that and take a look at it. The biota part, we will be doing some fish study around the Oscoda. In fact, we do fish studies in the Oscoda. And so that's a fair question. And we need to do more. So thank you for bringing that up. I've made a note to talk to the staff and Water Resources Division about continuing to do additional work on that. So I'm assuming that he meant around the Oscoda area. So I will contact Brandon Armstrong and Water Resources Division about that. They had some additional sampling that they intended to do off the Oscoda. So thank you very much for a good reminder that we need to do more work there. So I make a note and I will contact him. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I have put the contact information for Beth and Amanda up in case you'd like to collect that, and I'll put the MDHHS and DNR contact information up here too. We have a comment from Rex, and he has a follow-up comment on the caller's question concerning water sampling on Cedar Lake. In addition to EGLE's testing of surface water at Cedar Lake, the Cedar Lake Improvement Board conducted both groundwater and surface water sampling in 2019 on Sherman Creek and surface water sampling at Jones Creek. We tested for PFAS and VOCs. All results came back non-detect. Our results for surface water PFAS also matched EGLE's 2019 testing of Sherman Creek of non-detect. So thank you for that comment, Rex. And Les, I don't know if we had any questions that I wasn't able to see. If not, I'm going to go over to our caller.
Here I am, Sue. Sorry, I was trying to clear a question. So I wanted to make sure that a few questions that I see aren't ones that were already answered. There's a question concerning processing equipment or processing equipment manufacturers. Excuse me, just a moment. Put my camera on. All right, is there any process equipment manufacturers doing any piloting at this time? Is there any consulting engineering firms involved with the study and or piloting?
Hi, this is Beth on the former base. I'm not aware of, how that is phrased with the process going on right now. I will say that I know a CERTIP study has been funded on Wurtsmith. I believe that Dave Gibson has mentioned that one before from the Air Force.
Yeah, I think what he's asking is that, is there any opportunities for equipment manufacturers to be able to talk to someone about their ideas and their engineering solutions to problems? And the answer would be EGLE is not the one that is installing this equipment or doing the work on that. You would need to contact the Air Force and talk to them. What the Air Force would propose, then we look at what they propose and determine if we believe that what they are proposing, the equipment and engineering work that they're doing, is acceptable to us. So EGLE is not putting out equipment or doing any studies like that. You would need to talk to the Air Force. A good chance to find out who you would want to talk to would be tomorrow night at the RAB meeting. There'll be folks from the Air Force making presentations, and there'll be contact information there. That would be a really good opportunity to get the folks that you would like to talk to about that at that meeting.
Thanks, Mike.
And Rex, I do see your comments on the Cooperative Great Lakes Monitoring Program, so thank you for those.
Okay, Sue, what I have left that I see, I think we're already answered Connie's question concerning the sampling below grade. I think we touched on earlier.
I actually don't think we did answer.
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah, that one is regarding the MW26 location that we had in Oscoda Township. She's pointing out that the water sample that was on the figure was collected from 32 to 33 feet. That was actually the result from July. I just had the figure handy for that sampling event, so that's the one I used, and those were the results that were listed on there. But what we have with a lot of our monitoring well locations is a cluster of wells that's capable of sampling multiple depths below ground surface. So we have shallow intervals that we can sample and deeper intervals at many of our sampling locations. So in July, we sampled that particular location on MW26 at the 32 to 33 foot depth, because that is the interval that we saw the highest concentrations back in 2017 and 2018. So we repeated that location. And then in October of 2020, that same depth went from 12.9 parts per trillion PFOA to 11 parts per trillion PFOA. But we also added the additional shallow interval as one of our sampling points, and that was non-detect for PFOA. So hope that helps answer your question.
Thanks, Amanda. Sue?
All right, we have a hand raised. Caller with the last three numbers, 859. And Les will unmute you, and then you can unmute your phone. Caller with last three numbers, 859. Looks like you're still muted. All right, let's go to Arnie.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Arnie.
Clarification question for Puneet. On you said that the screening criteria that EPA came up with for ingestion of PFAS in surface water, freshwater, surface water, is not applicable to this site. PFAS is PFAS in my mind, and humans drinking or ingesting fresh water in New Hampshire are the same effect in Michigan. So my question is, on what basis was that decision made not to use that criteria here? Was it a health related decision by your office, or was it a CERCLA decision not to use it?
I'm just telling you based on the presentation that you sent, as it was written, like if this is site specific. I think I remember talking to Beth. Hey Beth, do you have any comments on that?
Sure. Based on what I remember us talking about then and Arnie, is that that was a site-specific value that they used during the site inspection phase to determine if additional sampling was needed. But I think here at Wurtsmith, we do have additional fish data that EGLE provided. And I know that in the RI that Air Force plans to do the risk assessment. And so,
Okay, just to clarify, I'm not talking about the fish criteria. I'm talking about the surface water and the micro layer and the foam being ingested on Air Force Beach.
I'm not sure I understand your question then.
Well, the criteria that I gave to Puneet was ingestion of surface water by a swimmer and children, PFAS in the surface water, and it was 2,000 parts per trillion. That was the screening level. And the micro layer that is being studied, and the foam goes up to 220,000. And I think that the micro layer, they're going to be finding in the 5,000 range. So there's a pretty good chance that they're going to blow and Van Etten Lake the criteria that was used for screening in New Hampshire. And I don't see where human ingestion criteria is site specific. It's freshwater, it's humans, it's the same PFAS. So I'd like to know on what criteria was that screening criteria that I gave DEQ in 2018 in Air Force the same month, why it has not been looked into and possibly used as a screening level criteria for the foam and surface water ingestion.
So you're talking about health advisories there, Arnie?
Don't jump to the health advisory. That's a whole other can of worms. I'm talking about a regional site screening level. Why can't and why shouldn't your team use that as one to investigate and ask for the sampling to be done by the Air Force, just like the Pfas Air Force team sampled the surface water for.
So you're asking for a couple of things. And so one is the micro layer on the surface water. And again, I know we talked about earlier in this that some of that sampling technology is still forthcoming, and I'll rely on kind of Mike Jury to help me out there since he's more familiar with those studies. The second item on the foam, no, right now EGLE does not regulate surface water foam. So we haven't proceeded to sample more foam at this time.
Well,
And Ani, we can follow up with you regarding P's screening level and how our calculation work. We can definitely follow up with you.
okay, well, I'm going to be talking to someone in ATSTR next week about this. So maybe we can talk soon. The end of the week, maybe.
Okay. Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Arnie.
Thanks.
Julie had a question about
So,
RAB.
Sue, I'm sorry, Sue. The caller 586 was waiting unmuted, and I don't know if they still wish to speak, but I think we should give them an opportunity because they've waited a long time.
Okay. Caller 586. I'm not sure if your line is still muted. It looks like your line is muted. Can you try tapping *9 to see if you can unmute your phone?
Oh, there they are.
There we go.
Hello.
Hello.
I pushed every combination I could. I'm sorry. I already asked my question. I'm all set.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your patience. Julie had a question about the RAB meeting, and RAB stands for Restoration Advisory Board. The RAB meeting is tomorrow night. Gosh. EGLE, can you describe what the RAB is for Julie? And then I have information on how to attend.
Sure. The RAB is an opportunity for the Air Force and community members to discuss the environmental restoration along with stakeholder agencies. So MDHHS, EGLE, Skoda and Oscoda townships, as well as community members, and then the Air Force. And I did post the link in the chat to the Air Force's page where you can sign up for the RAB and access RAB materials. And I know, so you'll probably go over the MPART way to get there.
Yeah, so on your screens, you should see, if you're online, my screen, my slide, which has information about the RAB meeting. If you go to the MPART website, you'll see this public meetings button. And if you click on that, it will take you to the, it should take you to the calendar for all of the MPART public meetings. And you'll see the Restoration Advisory Board meeting here. So if you click on that, then you should be able to register for the meeting here. Those meetings are open to anyone. Anyone can attend. And there is a board established of Oscoda community members who serve on the RAB. So yeah, that's how you would attend the meeting. I do want to point out while I'm at this page that to find information, more information out about the Wurtsmith investigation or the Oscoda area investigations, there's a couple of things you could do. I do have that on the slide too, but you can type in michigan.gov/Wurtsmith, and that will take you to the Wurtsmith investigation page. Probably the easiest way to get to the Oscoda sites is to, let me go back in case you haven't seen that. So go to investigations. Oh, by the way, this website is michigan.gov/MPART, which stands for the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. So if you type in michigan.gov/MPART, you'll come to the main page. If you click on investigations and then PFAS sites, that will take you to a page with a listing on all of the PFAS sites in the state. At this moment, there are 153. And all of these headings are clickable. So you can sort all of the sites by name, And this is sorting alphabetically, starting with numbers and the A in the alphabet here. Click it again, you'll get to the end of the alphabet. You can click on county, so you can look up all of the Iosco County sites. So you would find all of the Skoda sites here. And again, you can click on any of these headings for information that you're looking for. There's a lot of information on the MPART website, Fish and Wildlife here, PFAS and fish, PFAS and deer, and then also a foam page. So lots of information available on the MPART website. Here are some additional resources. So michigan.gov/Wurtsmith. I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong web address. It's michigan.gov/PFAS response to get to the MPART webpage. Eat Safe Fish Guidelines, michigan.gov/Eat Safe Fish. And here's a lengthy link for the ATSDR website. These slides will be posted within a day or two on the website, as will the meeting. The meeting will be sent for transcription, and then it will be posted, and you can find a recording of this meeting and the slides there. I don't see any other questions. Let me take one more look here. So we'll wrap up the meeting. If you have feedback for us on this meeting, if you want us to let us know how we did you get the information you needed? Do you have other feedback for us? What would have made the meeting better? Here's my email address. You can send me an email and I'll forward that on to my colleagues. But we would like to hear from you. So if you have a minute, you can give us some feedback. I had displayed the EGLE contact slides previously. Hopefully you caught those. And then the MDHHS and DNR contact information. Once again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate your time. I know these meetings tend to go long, but we really want to be sure that we're answering all of your questions. And I know that some of you will be attending the RAB meeting tomorrow night. So it does make for some long nights for you. We do understand that. So we appreciate all you're doing for your community, all of your concerns. And we hope that you stay safe, stay healthy, stay warm, and we will likely be joining you again for our next quarterly community meeting. So thanks everyone. We'll be talking soon. Good evening.